since this is a metric space, it satisfies the triangle inequality, so you know over here in the Euclidean plane or in the hyperbolic plane, you have a comparison triangle. You have a triangle x bar, y bar, z bar, which is an isometry on the edges. So this length is the same as this one. From x to z is the same as the length from x bar to z bar and so on. So this is called a comparison triangle for this triangle. And then the comparison inequality, the cat zero inequality, because we're comparing with things in the Euclidean plane here, just says that triangles in your space are no fatter than triangles in your comparison space. So, for example, if you take a point P, there'll be a comparison point, P bar along here, just whatever length from Y to P, you just choose the same distance along here, and that gives you your comparison point. And you want that this distance is to be less than or equal to the Euclidean distance between x bar and P bar. So these triangles are at least as thin as triangles in the Euclidean plane. And you can do a version of this where you work with hyperbolic plane here and you get what's known as a cat minus 1 inequality. And then the geodesic metric space is cat 0 or cat minus 1 if it satisfies this comparison inequality for all geodesic triangles. And then a group is said to be a cat 0 or a cat minus 1 group if it acts geometrically on one of these cat 0 or cat minus 1 spaces. And by geometric, I just mean one, it's an action by isometries, and two, properly discontinuously, and three, it's co-compact. And again, so for some examples, free groups, the fundamental group of any closed, non-positively curved n-manifold, hyperbolic knot groups. In Ian's talk, he mentioned, these groups are not Gromov hyperbolic because of the z plus z subgroup, but they turn out to be nice cat 0 groups.
So all those you're saying are cat 0, not cat negative 1?
These would be cat 0. Certainly the hyperbolic knot groups are definitely not cat minus 1. Yeah, the action on the hyperbolic 3 space, that's not co-compact. And what you have to do is you have to sort of cut out this cusp at infinity, cut out a neighborhood of that. So you're removing hyperboles. So the actual model space you're looking at there is hyperbolic space, 3 space, minus this countable collection of hyperboles. That's not negatively curved. It has a boundary, and the induced metric in the horror spheres is this Euclidean metric. Yeah, good question. So some properties of non-positively curved groups, they're finitely presented. We have a solvable word problem. If you take a word in the generators of the group and you ask the question, is this word, does it represent the identity element or not, you can solve this problem. There's a nice construction to do that. And I'll tell you how it comes just from the non-positive curvature. And there's a related notion called Dane function. Let me just skip ahead and tell you about that. So we've got a finitely presented group. It's just got a finite set of generators and a finite set of relators, which is just words in the generators. And what we're really looking at is the free group on this finite set of generators, mod out by the normal closure of this collection of relators. So that's the group given by that finite presentation. Now, the topological picture here is just to take a bouquet of cardinality of x circles, just labeled by these generators here. And then when you, for each relator, you can attach a 2-cell. And what you do is, you think of your 2-cell as a polygon, and the word here, you just sort of read out the word in these generators here, and that describes the attaching map for this polygon on here. And that's a nice 2 complex. Its fundamental group is exactly this group here. So that's called presentation 2 complex. If you look at the universal cover of that, that's a simply connected 2 complex called a Cayley-2 complex corresponding to that presentation. And it's one skeleton you can check, it's just a Cayley graph of the group with respect to that set of generators. If we look at a word in the free group which represents the identity in the group, remember this is what we're looking at when we're trying to solve the word problem, see if a word in the free group generator represents the identity or not. Those things correspond to loops in the Cayley graph. Now this is inside the Cayley complex, which is simply connected, so you can fill that in by a disk. So there's a map, you can extend the map of the circle into a map of the disk in. You can make that map transverse to the bar centers of the two cells, pull back, and just count pre-image points. And so the area of a loop is sort of the minimum number of pre-image points that you see. You can move your disk around. If you don't like that picture, you can think about things algebraically. If your word represents the identity, what does it mean? It means it lives in this normal closure of relators. It means your word is a product of relators to plus or minus powers, and then these conjugating elements here. So it's a product of conjugates of the relators and their inverses. And the area is just the minimum such end in an expression like this. You can pass between the topological picture and this algebraic picture. So that's the area of a loop. And then the Dane function is just looking at the maximum area of loops in your Cayley graph of length less than or equal to. As with all of these things here, a particular Dane function will depend on the presentation you're giving. Let me just show you a quick example here. Here's Z, it's just X and a single generator and no relations, and it's Cayley-2 complex and its Cayley graph is just the line here. The Dane function is trivial. There's no two cells, there's no area to compute. You could also present Z on this side as two generators and one relation, A equals B, or AB inverse. And here your picture is just this infinite necklace here with all these little beads. You've just got an A, a B, and a bygone relation filling in between here. If you, for example, take A to the n, B to the minus n, that's a loop, it's got area n. So here your Dane function is linear, here it's trivial. So these are very different functions, but what you can show is up to the following. If you say that f is less than or equal to g, if f of x is less than or equal to c of g of c of x plus c of x. So I can find a constant c so that f of x is always bounded by just multiply, just stretch the input, stretch the output, and add a linear term. That's what we're saying f is less than g. And f is equivalent to g if f is less than or equal to g and g is less than or equal to f. Okay, so you're allowed to add linear terms. So the constant function, or the zero function here, is equivalent to this one here. But more generally, for any group, if you change the presentation, all you have to worry about is possibly adding linear terms, but just stretches in the input and output. And these functions are equivalent. So you get a unique equivalence class of a Dane function. If you have a Dane function that's like f of n is something like n squared, how would you solve the word problem? Well, you've got a word of length n, you know that you need to construct a diagram with at most n squared 2 cells. So you could just go off and construct all possible diagrams using at most n squared 2 cells. You also have some conditions on the diameter of the diagram as well, which you can read off. So you can solve the word problem this way. So for a non-positively curved group, the Dane function is bounded above by a quadratic function. So how do you see this? So here's the intuition. You have a loop. You can take all the, some edge path, take all the vertices along here, and you can connect them by paths, which, you know, this group here is, it's a delta hyperbolic metric space we're working with, or this group is mapping, you know, you can look at its orbit acting on a nice non-positively curved cat 0 or cat -1 space. What you can do is you can take geodesics in those spaces and approximate them in the group. So you've got these paths that are approximating geodesics in non-positive curvature. So, you know, geodesics in non-positive curvature, if this distance here is k, the distance here all the way as we go uniformly back will be less than or equal. So we've got distance 1 between the ends here. Now I've got approximations to geodesics, but what I can say is that there's some constant k, so that these paths here are uniformly k apart as they march out. So you just walk out here and you've got paths of length less than or equal to k filling out this diagram. So what have we shown? A loop here is a product of conjugates of smaller loops of length less than or equal to 2k plus 2. So if I take as my set of relations the set of all trivial words of length less than or equal to 2k plus 2, that does give you a finite presentation for the group, and the number of those relators I'll need to see that this guy is trivial is at most quadratic. So I've got one of these strips for each edge along here, and the length here, these are geodesics, is at most this length out here, so which is at most the length of the original. So I've got at most W strips or segments of this fan, and each strip is broken up into at most W loops of this length. So there's the quadratic function. If you're in the case of negative curvature, working with hyperbolic groups, you can actually go a little further. You can show that you've got a linear isoperimetric inequality. It's a very pretty argument that sort of says if you just look, take any starting point you like, if you look at a point that's furthest away on your loop, that you actually have to be doing something non-geodesic in the neighborhood of that, and you can always take a shortcut and reduce the length. That's what's known as a Dane number. Okay, so hyperbolic groups have linear Dane functions. In general, non-positively curved groups have got quadratic Dane functions. They're solvable conjugacy problems. How do you tell if the element G and the element H are conjugate? Well, I need to find some paired element, let's call it C, so that if I travel along G, then along C, it's the same as traveling along C and then H. When you think of this as a concatenation of paths in a Cayley graph, and that space is non-positively curved, again, if you look at a sort of minimal representative here for C, you look at a geodesic path here, you've got a rectangle, so what are we trying to do? We're trying to show that given G and H, I can bound the size of element C that I need to test that these guys are conjugate. So if this is too long, what I can see is that as I travel along here uniformly, that one of these segments will start to repeat, because I'm in a non-positively curved picture here, and these are geodesics. So whatever distance they start and whatever distance they end, some linear function of that, they won't stray any further than that apart as you travel along. So the picture might, a more convincing picture might be something like this. And then as you travel along here uniformly, these guys stay some linear function of this length and this length apart. So if this is too long, you're going to see a repetition, maybe this guy and this guy. So you can excise this part. You can just take this part of the diagram and attach it on here. And now you've got a shorter element that's giving you a conjugation between G.
But this only gives you an exponential bound?
Yeah, it gives you an exponential bound as a function of, I'm just showing that it's solvable and how non-positive curvature could feed that.
But you can do better than exponential.
You can, yes. Okay. Z subgroups are undistorted. Some very nice properties. Convex subgroups. So if you just take a group acting on a cat zero space and you look at a group which is stabilizing some convex subspace and acting co-compactly on that, it itself will be a cat zero group. In the case of hyperbolic groups, you can relax this. There's a notion called quasi-convex, and quasi-convex subgroups of hyperbolic groups are again hyperbolic. So there's some very nice properties of these groups. So what we're interested in here is trying to find groups, subgroups of non-positively curved groups which are not non-positively curved, which have some positive curvature phenomena. And the way we're going to detect it is we're going to find groups with Dane functions that are bigger than quadratic. And so we need to be looking at subgroups which are distorted in some sense. If they're convex or quasi-convex in a hyperbolic situation, they're again going to be non-positively curved. So I want to maybe just stop talking about group theory for a second and just come back to a picture you saw earlier in the week, which is a horosphere in the hyperbolic 3 space. So you have this upper half space model. So here's C, and you're looking at all points with third coordinate positive, and here at height 1 you've got a horosphere. So the first thing about this, as you can see, is that the geometry that's induced on this, the local geometry from H3, gives you a local geometry here. When you start integrating along and looking at geodesics here, you find out that it's not hyperbolic, it's Euclidean. So it's a very different geometry than the ambient geometry of hyperbolic 3 space. But the other thing to notice is that it's highly distorted. So another picture you may have seen of these is they look like this. They sort of touch at infinity, and this is your horoball here, and this is the horosphere. And your intuition should be telling you if you want to get from here to here that it's going into the horoball. This is a geodesic, but this length is a lot shorter than this. This is of the order of log of this length, and that's actually very easy to see. The metric here is just your Euclidean metric scaled by 1 over the third coordinate. So if you want to travel a distance n up here in hyperbolic geometry, you go up to e to the n. If you want to travel the distance 1 across here in hyperbolic geometry, what it's going to look like is the distance e to the n, and then back down here by a distance n, you'll get to a point, and this distance here is e to the n. So here's a path of length n plus 1 plus n, 2n plus 1, and I've traveled the distance e to the n down in the horosphere. So the horosphere is exponentially distorted. The geometry there is Euclidean. It's not like the ambient geometry of the hyperbolic space. So we're sort of asking a similar question, except instead of hyperbolic 3 space, I've got a group. Instead of the horosphere, I've got some subgroup. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about distorted subgroups of non-positively curved groups. You've seen some nice examples this week. If n is a closed hyperbolic 3 manifold fibering over the circle, you've got fiber and on the level of pi 1, you've got pi 1 of sigma 2 is a subgroup of pi 1 down 3, and it maps to fundamental group of S1 or Z. And this is a short exact sequence This guy is just a semi-direct product. With Z. We've got an automorphism of this surface here, pseudo-inossive automorphism, which is giving you your closed hyperbolic three manifolds. And in Chris's talk, he mentioned that pseudo-inossive automorphisms, they've got a lambda associated to them, and everything is stretched by an amount of lambda in one direction and compressed by an amount, 1 over lambda in the other direction. But in particular, if you start off with a word and iterate it a long time under the automorphism, that will grow like lambda to the end. Okay, so you can have the same picture there where you go, take a generator here, T of this guy, T to the n, some generator x, or just some element x in pi 1 of sigma 2, T to the minus n, and if n is sufficiently large, this will, so it's v to the n of x, and its length will be of order lambda to the n. So again, what is your picture is I'm traveling a long distance in the fiber subgroup by just traveling 2n plus 1 or 2n plus some lambda amount in the end. So we've got exponential distortion. The geometry of this fiber is hyperbolic, so you would have no way of knowing this from the picture of how it sits inside the three manifold, or if you lift the universal covers. This thing is so distorted, this hyperbolic plane, that its circle at infinity maps to a space-filling curve on the sphere. So this is, there's no way of sort of seeing the sort of intrinsic geometry of this fiber, so this hyperbolic space. Anyway, those are very nice. Chris talked about some free bicyclic examples. Again, if you like, you can just think about punctured surface bundles. That'll work as well. And then a few comments here. There are lots of examples of highly distorted, finitely generated subgroups of non-positively curved groups. There was an industry in producing these with lots of nice properties. They tend, for the most part, to be not finitely presentable. So there's fewer examples of finitely presented subgroups that are highly distorted. And then even among those, in order to really understand the distortion, you really need to understand that subgroup, that finitely presented subgroup, very well. You need to understand distances in it very well. And the easiest groups that people work with are free groups. It's very easy to talk about geodesics and free groups. So most of them are actually free groups sitting inside things. So there's very few examples of highly distorted, finitely presented, non-free subgroups of non-positively curved groups. Okay, so what's known about gain functions of subgroups of non-positively curved groups? Again, not much. Surprisingly few results. There was a nice trick that I'll tell you a little more about on the next slide. It's really an old trick due to Beardy, but Baumstein, Breitson, Miller, and Short noticed the sort of geometric content of this and really sort of exploited it in 1997. And they were able to produce subgroups of cat-zero groups which have exponential gain function. So again, these are very far from being cat-zero groups themselves because they've got huge gain functions. Or subgroups of cat-zero groups which have polynomial gain functions of any degree you like, cubic, quartic, and so on. Again, not cat-zero because it's strictly bigger than quadratic. There are some kernels of right-angled Artin groups. So we've heard right-angled Artin groups earlier in this week. This sort of standard map, if you just take all the generators in your standard description of your right-angled Artin group and map them to Z, look at the kernels of those things. At one point, I had said, oh, here's examples with cubic subgroups, finitely presented subgroups with cubic gain function. Here's examples with n to the 4 gain function. Oh, this should continue, n to the 5, and so on. I was woefully wrong. Will Dyson was a grad student at the time when I was giving this talk, and he went off and came out with a lovely thesis that said there's an upper bound of n to the 4 for gain functions of subgroups of right-angled Artin groups. subgroups, or for these kernel subgroups of writing groups. Anyway, the end of the 4 examples there, the end of the 3 examples are very like the Beery trick. I'll tell you about that in the next slide. The end of the 4 examples are very different. And that's why I just included them here. In 1999, I gave an example of a finitely presented non-hyperbolic subgroup of a hyperbolic group. So its Dane function is at least quadratic. Gershon and Short in 2002 showed it was bounded above by a polynomial, but I don't know what the Dane function is of the subgroup. There are lots of other constructions. For example, you can build groups with distinct homological and homotopical Dane functions. So the homological Dane function, remember, is asking the area of disks which fill a loop as a function of the length of the loop. It's asking about bounds there. A homological version would just say, look, I'm trying to fill the loop with 2 chains, or trying to fill it with surfaces. Like if I map in a punctured surface and use that as the boundary, could I fill more efficiently? Could the area of those punctured surfaces be less? And we produced examples fairly recently with Aaron Abrams, Paul Abidani, and Robert Young of groups with distinct homological and homotopical Dane functions. Again, in one of the examples, the homotopical Dane functions were exponential, lower bound of exponential and upper bound actually exponential. And the homological were bounded above by a polynomial, but we didn't know them on the nose. But even these constructions, these were using some combination of right angle arcing techniques and Beery doubling trick techniques. So in terms of techniques for producing these, is
A question?
yeah.
Isn't it the fiber of a hyperbolic mapping torus with the pseudo alpha would be finally presented?
It's a finitely presented hyperbolic subgroup.
It's coherent with 3 nodes. I'm wondering what was different about finitely presented non-hyperbolic subgroup.
But this is, I mean, so the subgroup there is finitely presented, and it is hyperbolic. I mean, it's the fundamental group of a closed surface, so yeah. Or a punctured surface. Yeah, yeah.
Distorted.
Yeah. It's just highly distorted, but it is itself a hyperbolic group. Okay, so here's the Beery doubling trick. It's got an old history that goes back to Stallings in 1963. He had a great paper where he produced a finitely presented group. So this, if you like, just a collection of 2 cells, 1 cells and 0 cells, finite collection. Look at the fundamental group. It's got non-finitely generated H3. It's wonderful. If you want to try and fill in 3 cells to build a KG1, you need to, although it's just this finite number of 2 cells given in front of you, you need to stick in infinite. Great example. In 76, Beery was looking at this, found out actually that it sits inside the direct product of 3 copies of the free group. And he was interested in finiteness properties generalizations. So he produced subgroups of the direct product of n copies of free group of rank 2 that were of type Fn or Fpn minus 1, but not Fpn. So just some generalization of finite presentability and non-finite generation of the next one. And then, as I said, these guys in 97 used this Beery trick. So I'll just describe it here. They give it a slightly more general version in their paper. The double, so again, think of your manifold example here. An n bicyclic group. Here was a surface bicyclic group. So an n bicyclic group, and I can take 2 copies of that and glue them along n. Take the free product with amalgamation and 2 copies of this and glue them along the fiber. If you want to think about it in terms of actual 3 manifold, take 2 fibered 3 manifolds and identify the fibers. Just glue the 2 fibers. So that double is sitting inside this times F2. And something times F2 is sounding good if this guy was non-positively curved, you're just taking a direct product with a bouquet of circles, you're going to remain in the non-positively curved universe. But inside here, you've got T times U and N. That gives you a copy of N, the semidirects D. t times v in n gives you a second copy of that. And how do those guys intersect? Just in the copy of n.
Why is it sitting inside the direct product of the semi-direct product in N2? The second line under the double trick.
Oh, because here, the semi-direct product is just generated by the kernel n and t. I'm taking a direct product with u and v. And now I'm just taking t times u. So u is acting here, it's not doing anything at all. It's just conjugation by u leaves things alone. So I can multiply u by t, and this guy acts on this the same way that t did. So this is just a semi-direct product of n and t. Here's the second copy of it. And those two guys intersect just in this. And it is actually a free product of amalgamation subgroup. That was their observation. That was Beery's observation. So it's very nice. Again, look at our example. If this is a closed hyperbolic 3-manifold, this space, if I just take a direct product with a bouquet of a wedge of two circles, is some 4-dimensional complex. The natural geometry there is hyperbolic 3-space crossover. It's non-positively curved geometry. It's just, it branches. But sitting inside here, you've got a 3-manifold glued to a 3-manifold along the fiber. And that's got exponential gain functions. How do you sort of see that? So you take your 3-manifold, glue it to a second copy along a fiber, and then look at the universal cover of that space. So you'll see a copy of H3, which is got all these parallel copies of the fiber. Now these things, I'm drawing them as if they were undistorted, but are actually exponentially distorted. And then off each one of these, I've got another copy of H3 with lots of parallel copies, and off here and so on. And so if you look at it on the side, it's just given by the tree for this free group here. So you've got this nice picture of this sort of copies of H3 glued along these highly distorted copies of H2 in this nice tree-like pattern. And what do we say? Well, we said before that if you travel away from here in a monodromy direction at distance n, over here at distance 1, and back down the monodromy distance n, what have you done? You've taken this word here, this element, this generator, and applied phi to the n to it. So this is this is distance 1, and this length here is lambda to the n. It's exponential in n. And then you can do the same thing over here. Go off the monodromy. This is just a second copy of this picture. Glued along here. Go up a distance n, 1, back down n. So we'll keep the same directions here. And you've got this picture here. So you've got a loop of length 4n plus 2. And any disk that fills that is going to have to intersect in this fiber here. And the distance across here is exponential. So whatever filling disk you have, you've got these 2 points, and this path at least is lambda at the end. So even if you look at a small neighborhood of this, you've got exponential area. So you've got an exponential gain function. Okay. That's it. That's the Beery trick. And I mentioned on the last page that not only could you do exponential.
Is there a simpler example where you like double a box like solitary group? Oh, but it won't be non-positive.
That won't be non-positively
Okay,
curved.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But it will have exponential gain.
It will have exponential gain function. The bounce accelerator itself will have exponential gain functions.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the main term. Which power functions? So we're just interested in, again, remember this equivalence of functions. You could talk about not just polynomials, but you could talk about an x to the 2.5 power, for example. That's in an equivalence class. It's different than x squared and x cubed and so on. So which alpha appears, well, look at the set of all alpha in 2 infinity so that x to the alpha is a Dane function of a subgroup of a cat zero group. What we're able to show is that not only are just the integers in there, which we already knew from the Beery doubling trick, But there's actually a dense set of alpha in here. I want to just, for the rest of the talk, at least convince you that there's a non-integral part, and then just give you an idea about how density works. Okay, so but just to reiterate, what was
Sorry.
yeah.
These subgroups in the theorem, are they finitely generated, finitely presented?
These are finitely presented, yeah.
Okay.
We need finitely presented groups to talk
So it's a
about
countable
data.
set.
Yes, I mean, when you're looking at Dane functions, which are power functions, you're necessarily, forget about subgroups and cat zero groups, you're looking at a countable set of powers or of indices. Yeah. So in this situation, we're asking which of those can be indices for Dane functions of this form in subgroups and cat zero groups.
Are there countably many such subgroups?
Yes, we're finding countably many big cat zero groups, each containing a subgroup with a particular x to the alpha for a dense set of x alpha. That's
So
what we're doing.
the alphas would be like the rationals sitting inside.
It would be lovely to get the rationals. We can't do that. Yeah.
Well, I
We
was
have an
thinking,
idea
proof
of-
of health analogy, there's this countable set in there.
Yes.
That's-
They will. Yeah. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Why it looks like the rationals. Yeah. And there's two integers actually describing the family. You'll see details. Okay. So I need to tell you how to build the ambient cat zero groups, and then I need to tell you how to understand the intrinsic geometry of the subgroups. And that's it. Okay. Remember, I'm just trying to get one non-integral, I'm trying to get a Dane function of the form x to the alpha for some alpha between 2 and 3. And if I do that, I'll be happy, and then I'll sketch how you can generalize that. So the building blocks are special free bicyclic groups. So this is a little bit of a mouthful. So it's again, a F2 semi-direct Z. There's an automorphism. What? It's a Nosov. But why can I say a Nosov here? Well, the first thing is automorphisms of the free group of rank 2. The free group of rank 2 is a very special case. These are all geometric. You can realize them as pi 1 of mapping classes of the punctured torus. So we can actually be just looking at punctured torus bundles here, and I'm just talking about 2x2 matrices, and I can talk about the Nosov maps. So the picture that Chris was describing literally is just a linear algebra. You know, there's a lambda greater than 1 and a 1 over lambda, and I've got my two different eigendirections in the plane, or the punctured plane. These guys are fundamental groups of a cat zero space. I'm trying to build a cat zero group, so are a non-positively curved 2 complex. And this non-positively curved 2 complex has an extra symmetry. So there's an involution isometry that takes the stable ladder to itself and takes x and y to their inversions. So this seems a little weird. You'll see why we need it later. But here's an explicit one of these guys. And I found it as follows. Let me just read through here. This is how I found it. I wrote down the simplest. Oh, sorry. I think that I missed a word back here in the previous thing. Yeah, not just a Nosov. I wanted them to be palindromic automorphisms. I wanted them to take generators to palindromes. So I wrote down the easiest one I could think of. X goes to x, y, x, and y goes to x. Subject to the other condition that I wanted it to be an also, so that's a 2, 1, 1, 0. And if you go and do the linear algebra, you get lambda is 1 plus the square root of 2. It is you've got a stretch direction. That's the leading eigenvalue. And then everything else was done for us. So again, F2 semi-direct Z is pi 1 of a punctured torus bundle. If you haven't seen this theory before, I don't know, somebody mentioned it earlier in the week, please look at it, it's wonderful. You can basically look at the intermediate cover. So this is a 3 manifold, but you can look at the intermediate cover, which is just the plane minus the lattice, and cross with OR. So it's just that cover, the Z plus Z. Well, Yeah, I've taken the universal cover and modded it by z equals c. So I'm looking at that cover. What you can do is you've got this plane with all these punctures, and you can triangulate that. Your matrix 2, 1, 1, 0 is going to take that to another plane, which you can superimpose on this. And then you can pass between the first triangulation and the second triangulation by just doing these little simple moves. You move from a picture like this to a picture like this, just by changing the diagonals. And then you've got, maybe in the next plane, you think of this as the final thing and you want to replace this diagonal by another one. So you do a sequence of these moves. And when you do these moves, you sort of puff the little thing up and look at it like a little pillowcase. So now you've got your three-dimensional picture in here. And this is your punctured plane crossover. Tiled by what? By ideal tetrahedra. That's what these things are. These are just tetrahedra and the vertices are missing. And so when you quotient out by the z-squared action and by the matrix action, you're going to get an ideal triangulated three-manifold. Great. You can collapse the ideal tetrahedra on spines. And when you do that, you get a 2 complex. And Hatcher and Floyd in this 1982, the way you describe this matrix as a product of very elementary matrices up to some finite order stuff tells you how many tetrahedra you're going to use and so on. It's a wonderful theory. Anyway, they use that to understand incompressible surfaces in one's function torus model. It's a great paper to look at. Anyway, Tom Brady, my brother, in '95 looked at this paper and said, God, this is great. I can take this spine here and make it cat zero, locally cat zero. I can make it non-positively curved. There's lots of ways of doing it. He came out with a very nice way to work for everything uniformly. He used angles which were multiples of pi and 3. So pi and 3, 2 pi and 3 and pi. So there's 2 cells, that's all he ever had. There were piecewise Euclidean structure on this. So anyway, for this example, it turns out there are 2 tetrahedra. And the spine is just dual to that. So the spine is going to have 2 vertices, which I denoted here by the circle and the square. And it'll have only 2 tetrahedra, and the faces are glued up in pairs. So there's only 4 ideal triangular faces in this, so there's going to be 4 edges. And 2 of the edges I denote here by the green and black edges go from the circle to the square edge, and the green and the blue. And the other 2 edges here, the red and the black edge, go from the square to the circle. So that's the one skeleton. And these two cells, this octagon here that's actually been deformed so it looks like an elongated hexagon, and this quadrilateral that's just obtained by taking 2 equilateral triangles. Tom has a nice description in his paper of how to assign the metric. If you check this, you can check this is a non-positively curved 2 complex. You can also check that its fundamental group is exactly this group here. Let me just tell you where the T is. The T runs from the vertex here. Just vertical. That's T, the middle of this cell. And this purple edge is X, this purple edge is Y. And if you want to, you can just check that these relations hold by chopping these diagrams up into jigsaw pieces and gluing the jigsaw pieces together to just check what happens when I run a T, then an X, and run a T down here. How do I fill in? What do I get? And so on. Okay. But look at this. There is a nice, if I can reflect in the middle of this cell here, that's a nice symmetry, and in the middle of this. And all I'm doing is I'm interchanging the red and black edges, I'm interchanging the blue and green edges. So there's how the isometry is defined on the 1 skeleton, and that's how it extends over the 2 skeleton. Now there is an isometry of this non-positively curved structure. And if you look at it on fundamental groups, what does it do? It takes X to X inverse, Y to Y inverse, it leaves T alone. Okay. All right. could build an isometry. I could take a product of two copies of that, two complexes we just described. That's also cat 0. And I can define the isometry capital sigma now, just made out of little sigma on ordinates, except I'm changing the image of P1, P2 is sigma P2, sigma P1. That's an isometry, and so it's fixed set. The subset of that 4 complex. It's a non-positively curved 4 complex. I've got a big isometry acting on it, and its fixed set is a locally convex subspace of K2. Now, what is that fixed set? Well, it's just a set of all P sigma P. Why is that? Well, I need sigma P1 to equal P2, but sigma squared is the identity, so from that you conclude that sigma P2 is sigma P1. And all you're looking at is P sigma P. So it's just a copy of K, a diagonal copy of K, but sort of put in a sort of funny angle. It's an anti-diagonal copy of K in there. And I'm denoting that by delta K. And I'm going to take a 6 complex, 3 copies of that 2 complex, and there's 3 ways of putting K cross K in there, so there's 3 copies of that diagonal in there. This seems unnecessarily complicated. We can't do this 1 or 2 dimensions lower, unfortunately. And then I've just got a graph of spaces. This is the cat 0, or locally cat 0 space. I take my 6 complex. Remember, I've got these copies of delta 1, delta 2, and delta 3, these nice diagonal, locally convex copies of K sitting inside there. And I just attach handles. I glue the delta 3 to the delta 1 just by a K cross an interval. Just glue on a handle. It's just identity map here, identity map here. And the same on this side. And that's just product structures. Since the stuff that you're gluing on is locally convex, this thing will be non-positively curved. Okay. Now its fundamental group is a cat 0 group. What is its fundamental group? It has a nice graph of groups description. It's just, I think we call the fundamental group of K B. So it's just B cubed. And inside there we had copies of B, these diagonal copies of B, 3 of them. And all I'm doing is I'm forming a graph of groups where I identify one copy of B with another one, and the second copy of B with also the third. That's all. Very simple graph of groups. What's the subgroup? Oh, shoot. Yeah. So we have these building blocks, and then we've got these diagonal subgroups. So what are the subgroups, the diagonal subgroups? Let's say a little more about these delta subgroups here. Because sigma takes x to x inverse, and our fixed point set where things have to form P, sigma P, when we look at how these things, generators for this copy of K, how they look, we're going to see, an element x1, and then we're going to see the next guy inverse, x2 inverse. I'm just writing x1 inverse x2 instead. This is just how I'm putting it down. But the key thing is, this anti-diagonal is something, and then the second coordinate inverse. y1 inverse y2. And then remember, sigma sent t to itself, so it's just t1, t2. So there's a regular diagonal in that direction. That's just a copy of f2 on x1 inverse x2, y1 inverse y2, which I'm calling h1. And it's semi-direct product, standard action by T1, T2. And there's the second copy with 2s and 3s, and the third copy, I'm not doing it cyclic, I'm just calling that 1s and 3s. It doesn't matter, it's just for ease a little later on. And now G, I've just sort of schematically drawn it over there, but it's just 3 copies. It's this B group cubed, a U and a V, and all the U and V do is they just take these diagonal subgroups to themselves, literally on the nose. Like when I say 3 goes to 1, what I'm saying is that this generator is sent identically to that generator, the next one identically to that one, and this stable letter identically to the top stable letter, and so on. You can use T2 transformations to rewrite these as replace the stable letter U by E, where E is U times a little T1, T2. So this is very like the Beery picture. and V, or F is just V times T2, T3. So now when you, again, this group is just taken to this one, this group is just conjugated to that one. But now there's an extra phi twist. So it's just a different way of describing the same group. This picture, the top picture, shows you that it's cat 0. This picture is going to show that it's got a nice, quirky subgroup. Okay. So here's the Snowflake subgroups. You just build a group out of the three groups F2. So you've got F2 cubed and E and F. And E and F are going to take the diagonal copies of F2. So just the things generated by, for example, x1 inverse x2, y1 inverse y2, and so on. And it's going to map those to themselves, you know, the third one to the first, the third one to the second, but it's going to do an application of phi in doing so. Okay? And there's a nice result of Bass, which says, actually, you know, you can sort of write this guy down and think of it just as an H and N extension of groups. There's the original description of G as a multiple H and N, or as a graph of groups. There's the original description of G as a graph of groups. The map from here to the G group, that's a morphism of graphs of groups in the sense of Bass. And Bass is a lovely theorem which tells you when morphisms give you injective maps on the level of fundamental groups and graphs of groups. And we just checked that, and it works. It's lovely. So this Snowflake group has its own free product, or its own graph of groups description. It's just F2 cubed. There's these weird diagonal copies of F2. And I'm taking the third one to the first and the third one to the second, but in doing this, I'm applying phi while I'm doing it. Okay, and then it's a subgroup. Okay, so why does this guy, in 5 minutes or less, or 3 minutes or less, why does this guy have a large name function? So here's the key fact. In these vertex groups, if WPQ is a palindrome, then this relation in x1 inverse x2 and so on, W with 2s and 3s, and now 1s and 3s is a subgroup, that relation holds. And likewise when you just interchange the first two factors. Here's the proof for the first two. Here's the word just in x1, y1. Here's the same word written out in terms of x2, y2. This product here is a product of two free groups. But, you know, and these are diagonals of edges, but what are diagonals of squares? The square I'm looking at here, it's the last element of this word here, but it's coming from the first element of the same word here. So I need the last element to match up with the first. That's why I need palindrome words here. And then I'm just putting in the diagonals. Anyway, that's the word in the 1s and 2s, that's it in 2s and 3s, and there's the proof that it equals in 1s and 3s. And also, this area is quadratic, quadratic, quadratic. You can think of this as like a corner of this room here. You know, it's just a picture in Euclidean tree space. It's just that picture, the corner of the room, little tetrahedron there. Only this is in a free group cross free group. It's a tree cross tree. It's really a tree cross tree cross tree. It's just a whole piece of that. And there's a proof that we've got quadratic area. So what's the upshot? I can take x, I can apply this phi to it n times. I get this really long palindrome. And I can take that in 1, 2, that in 2, 3, and it's the same as it in 1, 3. I could go down here and do it in the opposite order, this relation here. Okay. That large triangle is just the bottom one there. Remember, though, if I go over E or F, those red edges are just going out over E. I'm back to a copy of H3 again, but, you know, traveling from the H3 side back to the, for example, H1 side, or from the H3 side to the H2 side here, that involves an application of phi. So if this side here is like phi to the n, over here I'm talking about phi to the n minus 1. And over here I'm talking about phi to the n minus 2, and so on. So what's happening is, oh look, I've got this long word, I'm making it twice as long, which is ridiculous, but when I go over these strips, I've divided by 1 plus the square root of 2. So this path here is already shorter than this path here. And I'm just iterating that picture because I can, and it gives you this nice snowflake picture here. You iterate it n times, and in periphery, these things are just length 1. So what is the boundary word here as we read on? Well, every edge here corresponds to an edge of this dual tree. Actually, 2 edges. It's a 2-to-1 map. And then, you've got vertices out here of the dual tree will correspond to the final periphery edges here. So if I want to count the whole edge in this sort of fractal picture here, it's like 2 to the n. So that's the boundary. Remember, there's a second half of this diagram. What is the length of this? Well, this is lambda to the n. And what's the area? Well, the area of this diagram is actually dominated by the area in the center because it's just geometric series for the rest of it. And that's lambda to the 2n. It's lambda to the n, but it's squared, so it's quadratic. And so the area is, and you just play with logs, that's the boundary to the 2 log base 2 lambda. And woohoo! This is at least a diagram that says I've got huge area comparison to the perimeter, so I've got a lower bound of this function for the Dane function. The hard work that I'm not going to tell you about, and why we actually need to go into such high dimensions and work with things like this, is actually getting the upper bound and really showing the distortion of these free subgroups along here is at most this without the 2. So once you know an upper bound for distortion, you can very quickly from that get an upper bound for the Dane function. How do you get density? Well, again, just a little trick. Find a cyclic cover of that basic building block, free bicyclic or punctured torus bundle. There you're going to have a non-positively curved group with lambda squared or lambda cubed or so on. So you can have powers of lambda. So you can get any mth power you like by just taking an m-fold cyclic cover and using that instead of your k at the very beginning. And then, well, I need to jazz up the vertex group. So rather than just having a B cubed, a single B cubed, I can take 2 copies of B cubed and just glue them by identifying one of the diagonals with a diagonal over here. Now I've got 2 diagonals left over here, 2 diagonals left over here. So I can think of this as sort of a black box group here that has a base and 3 other guys. So when I go to develop snowflake diagrams, I've got trifurcation instead of bifurcation. And so I can do that for m or for any k. So I can have a k down here. So I can have 2 log k lambda m. So this is your 2-parameter family. You've got an m here. You've got a k down here, and that'll give you a dense set of exponents in the range 2. Okay. No minutes, sorry. But just 2 things I'd like to say. It'd be lovely if the ambient cat zero group that you constructed could be done in a sort of like what Danny Wise does with everything, just cubulates them. It'd be great if you could have one of these ambient guys sitting inside a right-angled arcing group and just come out with these weird subgroups with strange Dane functions as subgroups of right-angled arcing groups. That would be fun. And then, this is embarrassing, but it's a state of knowledge. Are there cat zero groups containing finitely presented groups with gain function greater than exponential? Nobody knows. It's a cool problem. It's very easy to build groups. Sol mentioned bounds like solitaire. You can iterate bounds like solitaire pictures on the stable letters of the previous bounds like solitaire groups, so you can get lots of iterated exponentials for gain functions. But I don't know how to put any version of that or a version of that with free groups inside a cat zero group. So I have no idea how to do this. I don't know if there's a genuine instruction. I would hope not. Thanks.
Any questions? Let's like no again.